Some of these people ruled cities. Some of them ruled countries. A few of them made so much money that their accountants gave up counting, and the rats literally ate whatever was left over. From the streets of Brooklyn to the slums of Medellin, from the East End of London to the mountains of Sinaloa, these 10 individuals built criminal empires that governments spent decades trying to dismantle. So here are the 10 most famous gangsters in the world, and the stories of how they rose and fell. A man robs 24 banks. He escapes from prison twice. The FBI names him public enemy #1. And then he walks into a movie theater and never walks out. John Herbert Dillinger was an American gangster during the Great Depression. He led the Dillinger Gang, which was accused of robbing 24 banks and 4 police stations. Dillinger was imprisoned several times and escaped twice. To understand how Dillinger reached this level, you have to go back to the 1920s in Indianapolis. Dillinger was a young man with no direction. He had attempted a robbery of a grocery store, gotten caught, and was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. He spent nearly a decade behind bars, and during those years he did not become reformed. He became educated in crime. Fellow inmates taught him how to plan heists, how to use weapons, how to read bank floor plans like blueprints for a construction project. When he was paroled in 1933, America was deep in the Great Depression. Banks were the villains in the public imagination, foreclosing on homes and seizing farms. Dillinger robbed those very banks, and for many desperate Americans, that made him something close to a folk hero. His gang tore through the Midwest with a ferocious efficiency that stunned law enforcement. They hit bank after bank, often with theatrical flair. Dillinger reportedly leaped over bank counters like an athlete at a track meet. The robberies were so frequent and so bold that newspapers tracked his movements, the way they track sports scores. He became a genuine American celebrity, his face on the front page of every major newspaper in the country. He was charged with, but not convicted of, the murder of an East Chicago, Indiana, police officer who shot Dillinger in his bulletproof vest during a shootout. It was the only time Dillinger was charged with homicide. The escapes cemented the legend. The first time, he broke out of an Indiana jail, reportedly using a wooden gun he had whittled and blackened with shoe polish to bluff his way past guards. The second escape was just as audacious. Each time he got free, his fame multiplied, and the FBI's embarrassment deepened. J. Edgar Hoover made Dillinger the face of his campaign to expand federal law enforcement powers. He was a notorious criminal who escaped from jail multiple times and was involved in several high-profile robberies. He was eventually killed by federal agents outside a movie theater in 1934. The end came on July 22, 1934, in Chicago. A woman in a red dress, later identified as a Romanian immigrant named Ana Campanas, led him into an FBI trap outside the Biograph Theater. Agents were waiting. Dillinger sensed the ambush and reached for his weapon, and federal agents shot and killed him. He was 31 years old, and his criminal career had lasted just over 1 year. A kid from the Lower East Side of Manhattan grows up running street rackets with his best friend. Decades later, he builds a palace in the desert that transforms a dusty Nevada town into the gambling capital of the world. Then he gets a bullet through his eye while reading the newspaper in his living room. American mobster Bugsy Siegel was one of the biggest gangsters in world history. He was born into a poor Ashkenazi Jewish family that had emigrated to the US from the Galicia region. As a boy, Benny left school and joined a gang on Lafayette Street in Manhattan. In his adolescence, he befriended Meyer Lansky, and they formed a small gang called the Bugs and Meyer Mob, which operated out of Manhattan's Lower East Side. Benjamin Siegel earned the nickname Bugsy because of his unpredictable, explosive temper, though calling him that to his face was a guaranteed way to ensure you would not enjoy the rest of your evening. From his earliest days in the underworld, he was a contradiction, devastatingly handsome, charming enough to navigate Hollywood social circles, and violent enough to murder without hesitation or remorse. Benny rose to prominence as a hitman in the 1920s and 1930s. He later gained significant influence within the Italian-American Mafia and the largely Italian Jewish National Crime Syndicate. Siegel was also a boyhood friend of Al Capone and helped him hide with his aunt. When a warrant for Capone's arrest on a murder charge was released, his partnership with Meyer Lansky was the foundation of everything. Together, they built a criminal network that bridged the gap between the Jewish and Italian mobs. Siegel handled the violence. Lansky handled the money. It was an arrangement that lasted decades and generated fortunes that would be impossible to calculate today. In the 1930s, Siegel was sent west to oversee mob operations in California. He quickly embedded himself in Hollywood, befriending actors, producers, and studio executives. He dined at the finest restaurants, attended premieres, and dated starlets. But he never stopped being a gangster. He controlled gambling operations, ran drug smuggling routes, and was suspected of multiple murders that could never be pinned to him. Then came the vision that would define his legacy and his downfall. Benny was a driving force behind the development of the Las Vegas Strip. He saw a stretch of empty Nevada desert and imagined a luxury resort and casino that would draw wealthy Americans from across the country. The project was the Flamingo Hotel, and it became an obsession. Construction costs spiraled wildly over budget, from an initial estimate of $1.5 million to over $6 million. The mob's money was evaporating, and Siegel's partners grew suspicious that he was skimming. The Flamingo's opening night in December 1946 was a disaster. Bad weather kept the Hollywood celebrities away. Gamblers won more than the house. Within weeks, the resort closed for renovations. When it reopened, it slowly began turning a profit, but the damage was done. On June 20th, 1947, Siegel sat in the living room of his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home. Someone fired a military-grade carbine through the window. He was shot multiple times, and a bullet went straight through his eye. The murder was never solved. 20 minutes after the shooting, associates of Meyer Lansky walked into the Flamingo and took control. An FBI fugitive for 16 years, a crime boss who ran extortion, racketeering, and murder across South Boston for 2 decades. And the entire time, he was secretly working as a federal informant. Whitey Bulger was one of the top 10 gangsters in the world. The organized crime boss and fugitive led the Winter Hill Gang in Boston from the 1970s until the mid-1990s. Early in his criminal career, local police gave Bulger the nickname Whitey because of his blonde hair. Bulger's story begins in South Boston's housing projects in the 1940s, a neighborhood of working-class Irish families where loyalty to your block meant everything and cooperation with law enforcement meant nothing. In 1943, 14-year-old Bulger was charged with larceny and sentenced to a juvenile reformatory. By then, he had joined a street gang known as the Shamrocks. Shortly after his release in April 1948, he joined the United States Air Force, where he earned his high school diploma and trained as a mechanic. Despite the regimented military life, Whitey Bulger had not reformed. He spent time in the military prison for several assaults and received an honorable discharge in 1952. After the military, Bulger spiraled deeper into a criminal underworld that would eventually consume Boston's entire organized crime landscape. He pulled bank robberies and was sentenced to federal prison, spending time in Alcatraz, Atlanta Penitentiary, and Leavenworth. But it was at Alcatraz where Bulger's story takes one of its more bizarre turns. He was one of the notable subjects for Project MKUltra by CIA, the government's notorious mind control experiments involving LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs. Bulger was a guinea pig, dosed with powerful psychedelics repeatedly, an experience he later described with a mixture of rage and black humor. When he returned to Boston, he climbed through the Winter Hill Gang's ranks. With calculated precision and extraordinary brutality, his rise coincided with a secret arrangement that would have destroyed his reputation in the underworld, had it ever been revealed at the time. Bulger became an FBI informant. Agent John Connolly, who had grown up in the same South Boston projects, recruited Bulger with the understanding that he would provide information on the Italian mafia operating in Boston. In exchange, the FBI would essentially look the other way while Bulger ran his own criminal enterprise. The arrangement was catastrophic for justice. Bulger fed the FBI just enough information to dismantle the Italian mob, eliminating his own competition with the help of the federal government. Meanwhile, he murdered, extorted, and trafficked drugs across New England with virtual impunity. He was known for his involvement in various illegal activities, including extortion, racketeering, and murder. In 1995, when he received a tip from Connolly that an indictment was coming, Bulger vanished. After 16 years at large and 12 years on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, he was arrested in Santa Monica, California, on June 22, 2011. He was 81 years old, living in a rent-controlled apartment with his longtime girlfriend and $822,000 in cash hidden in the walls. Bulger was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus 5 years in prison, for 11 murders and various other crimes. He was found dead in jail in 2018 at the age of 89. Bulger was in a wheelchair after being beaten to death by multiple armed inmates. He had been transferred to a West Virginia penitentiary less than 12 hours before the killing. No one has been formally charged. Before Pablo Escobar dominated the cocaine trade, a woman from the slums of Medellin had already built a cocaine pipeline from Colombia to Miami that generated hundreds of millions of dollars and left a trail of corpses stretching across 2 continents. Known as the godmother of cocaine, Griselda Blanco is a pioneer of Miami's largest drug trade. She spent her childhood and adolescence as a pickpocket and prostitute. When she grew up, she was indicted on drug conspiracy charges and sentenced to 10 years. Inside a Miami prison, she continued to run her cocaine business with the help of undercover members. Griselda Blanco was born in 1943 in Cartagena, Colombia, and her childhood was defined by poverty so crushing that crime was not a choice but a survival mechanism. She was committing petty crimes by the age of 11. By her teens, she had been involved in a kidnapping. She married multiple times, and each husband either died violently or was left behind as she ascended through the ranks of the drug world, with an ambition that outstripped virtually every man around her. In the 1970s, Blanco moved her operations to New York, running a massive cocaine distribution network out of Queens. It was recorded that she had moved around 300 kilos of cocaine a month and ordered the deaths of hundreds. She was not a background operator. She involved herself directly in the violence, reportedly ordering hits with such frequency and creativity that she pioneered the concept of the motorcycle drive-by assassination in Miami, a tactic that would later be adopted across the Colombian drug trade. When the heat in New York became too intense, she relocated her operation to Miami in the late 1970s, arriving just as the city was transforming into the cocaine capital of the United States. Blanco's timing was perfect. The demand for cocaine was exploding, and she had the supply and the connections to meet it. The violence that accompanied her operation helped define what became known as the Cocaine Cowboys era in Miami, a period of such extreme bloodshed that the city's murder rate reached levels that shocked even hardened law enforcement officials. Her personal life was as violent as her professional one. She named one of her sons Michael Corleone after the character in The Godfather. She is alleged to have ordered the murder of at least one of her husbands. Her rages were legendary and unpredictable. She was accused of federal drug conspiracy charges. Due to that, she spent 19 years in U.S. prisons. However, she was only charged on 3 of these murders. Once it was revealed that she spent the remainder of her life in Colombia, and, while shopping for meat in 2012 at the age of 69, she was gunned down in Colombia. She was on a motorcycle, the same method of assassination she had pioneered, killed by a hitman on September 3, 2012. The Cray twins, London's kings of crime, 2 brothers from the East End of London, become the most feared gangsters in British history, rubbing shoulders with celebrities and politicians while running an empire built on murder, extortion, and protection rackets. Going to school in Brick Lane, they were very much a product of the mixed demography of Whitechapel and Spitalfields, with English, Jewish, Irish, and Romani Gypsy ancestors. Ronnie and Reggie Cray were identical twins, but their personalities diverged sharply. Reggie was the strategist, the businessman, the one who could walk into a room and charm every person in it. Ronnie was the volatile enforcer, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, whose violent outbursts were so sudden and so extreme that even hardened criminals feared being in the same room with him. Their criminal organization, known as The Firm, controlled organized crime in London's East End throughout the late 1950s and 1960s. They were involved in murder, armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, gambling, and assaults. At their peak in the 1960s, they gained a certain measure of celebrity status by mixing with prominent members of London's society, being photographed by David Bailey and interviewed on television. They owned nightclubs that attracted the cream of London society. Politicians, actors, lords, and musicians drank alongside career criminals in the Cray's establishments. The twins used these connections ruthlessly, building a web of influence that made them virtually untouchable for years. They cultivated a public image as charming East End boys who had made good, while behind closed doors they tortured, mutilated, and murdered anyone who threatened their control. Ronnie's most infamous act was the murder of George Cornell. Cornell had called Ronnie a derogatory name, and Ronnie walked into the pub in broad daylight and shot him in the head. Reggie, meanwhile, was responsible for the gruesome murder of Jack the Hat McVitie, whom he stabbed repeatedly at a party after McVitie failed to carry out a contract killing. The Krays were arrested on 8 May 1968 and convicted in 1969. Both brothers received life sentences. Ronnie spent the rest of his life in Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, dying there in 1995. Reggie was released on compassionate grounds in 2000, suffering from terminal bladder cancer, and died just weeks later. Even in death, they remain the most notorious gangsters in British history. Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant. He never held a gun in a famous photograph. He never went to prison for a major crime. He died at 80 in his own bed, and yet he was arguably the most important figure in the history of American organized crime. The mob's accountant, Meyer Lansky, was known for his financial savvy, which he used to help transform the mafia into a business-like organization. He was in charge of bootlegging operations, money laundering, and gambling, developing casinos in Havana and Las Vegas. Despite being heavily monitored by the FBI, authorities never managed to convict him of anything, and he died of natural causes at the age of 80. Lansky was born Meyer Suchowolyansky in Grodno, in what is now Belarus, in 1902. His family emigrated to the United States in 1911, growing up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But while Siegel was the muscle, Lansky was the mind. He possessed a mathematical genius that allowed him to see criminal enterprise, the way a modern CEO sees a Fortune 500 company, in terms of profit margins, reinvestment strategies, and risk management. Meyer Lansky, known as the mob's accountant, was an American organized crime figure who, along with his associate Charles Lucky Luciano, was instrumental in the development of the National Crime Syndicate in the United States. This was the governing body of organized crime in America, a cooperative structure that allowed different criminal organizations to divide territories, settle disputes without bloodshed, and maximize profits through coordination rather than competition. It was, in essence, a criminal cartel modeled on legitimate business practices, and Lansky was its architect. A member of the Jewish mob, Lansky developed a gambling empire that stretched around the world. He was said to own points, percentages, in casinos in Las Vegas, Cuba, the Bahamas, and London. Lansky additionally had a strong influence on the Italian-American mafia and played a large role in the consolidation of the criminal underworld. His casino operations in Havana were so profitable that when Fidel Castro took power in Cuba and nationalized the casinos, it represented a personal financial catastrophe for Lansky and a strategic blow to the entire American mob. Lansky attempted to flee to Israel in the 1970s, invoking the law of return, but after a 2-year legal battle, the Israeli government sent him back to the United States. Even then, the U.S. government could not convict him. He was acquitted of tax evasion charges and spent his final years in relative comfort in Miami Beach. He died on January 15, 1983, reportedly with an estimated fortune of $300 million, though some estimates place the figure far higher. Lucky Luciano, the father of modern organized crime, a man who survived being beaten, stabbed, and left for dead on a beach, an attack so brutal it gave him both his nickname and a permanently drooping eye, went on to fundamentally restructure the American criminal underworld into an organization so efficient that it endured for generations. Known for being the first gangster to legitimize mafia power in America, Charles Lucky Luciano started his life of crime in the 5 Points Gang, before becoming a top assistant in Masseria's criminal organization after the Castellamarese War. He established the Commission in 1931, which formally connected the different mob families and aimed to prevent future gang wars. Charles Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily in 1897 and immigrated to New York as a child. He grew up on the Lower East Side, the same streets that produced Lansky, Siegel, and half of the men on this list. By his late teens, he was already running drug operations and extortion rackets. His early alliance with Meyer Lansky gave him access to the Jewish criminal networks, and his relationship with men like Vito Genovese and Frank Costello gave him standing within the Italian mob. He He became the rare figure who could move between different ethnic criminal organizations with equal ease. The Castellamarese War of 1930 to 1931 was the conflict that defined Luciano's ascent. Two old-world mafia bosses, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, were battling for supremacy over the New York underworld. Luciano worked for Masseria but saw an opportunity. He orchestrated Masseria's assassination in a Coney Island restaurant in 1931, reportedly excusing himself to the bathroom moments before gunmen burst in. With Masseria dead, Maranzano declared himself boss of bosses, a title Luciano found intolerable. 5 months later, Maranzano was murdered in his own office by a team of hitmen organized by Lansky. He is credited with creating the Commission, a governing body that oversaw all organized crime activities in the United States. Luciano was involved in various criminal activities, including bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. He was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison in 1936 for running a prostitution ring, but his sentence was later commuted in exchange for his assistance during World War II. He was deported to Italy in 1946 and died there in 1962. He abolished the title of Boss of Bosses, created the Commission, a board of directors for organized crime, and established a system that divided New York into 5 families, each with its own territory and hierarchy. This structure persists to this day. His 30 to 50-year sentence was shortened after he cooperated with the U.S. Navy during World War II, then commuted on the condition he be deported to Italy. He later died of a heart attack in Naples. Even from Italy, Luciano continued to influence organized crime in America until his death in 1962. The man they called Lucky left behind an underworld infrastructure that outlived him by decades. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, a man who ordered the assassination of his own boss in broad daylight on a public sidewalk in Manhattan, and then walked into a steakhouse to celebrate. He beat case after case in federal court, while wearing $2,000 suits and flashing his smile at the cameras. The media loved him. The FBI could not catch him. Until they did, John Joseph Gotti Jr. was an American mafioso and boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. He ordered and helped to orchestrate the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in December 1985 and took over the family. Born into a large Italian family in the 1940s, Gotti exhibited a keen intelligence but was drawn to criminal activities from a young age, starting with a high school gambling operation. He grew up in poverty in the Bronx and later in East New York, Brooklyn, neighborhoods where the mafia was woven into the fabric of daily life. Gotti actually tried his hand at legitimate work, a coat factory presser and a truck driver's assistant, before ultimately turning all his energies toward a life of crime. He rose through the ranks of the Gambino family, under the mentorship of Aniello Della Croce, the family's underboss. Before he died in 1976, Gambino named his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, as his successor, though Gotti's mentor, Aniello Della Croce, was rightly next in line. Under the tutelage of Della Croce, who was allowed to control nearly half the syndicate, Gotti quickly rose through the ranks of the underworld after his parole in 1977. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Gotti did not conceal himself from the public eye, and by the 1980s he had become the city's best-known organized crime leader, almost like a bootlegger in the era of Al Capone. He enjoyed his role as a celebrity gangster who appeared to be above the law. As the immaculately groomed Dapper Don, he became to his many local supporters a kind of romantic hero, a role that proved a major irritant to federal law enforcement. The Castellano hit was the act that vaulted Gotti from capo to boss. On December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano and his underboss, Thomas Bilotti, were gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan during the evening rush hour. Gotti reportedly watched the executions from a car parked across the street. It was a breathtakingly audacious move. Killing a sitting boss violated the commission's rules, but Gotti calculated that no one would challenge him. He was right. What followed was a decade of high-profile celebrity. That was unlike anything the American mob had ever seen. Nicknamed the Dapper Don for his designer attire and showy image, Gotti became head of the Gambino crime family after orchestrating the boss' death. He made millions with the organized crime syndicate, thanks to racketeering, gambling, hijacking, and other activities. Though he was called the Teflon Don for his uncanny ability to avoid jail during the 1980s, The FBI finally convicted him with the help of underboss Sammy Gravano. The turning point was Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti's own underboss, who flipped and became a government witness. Gravano's testimony, combined with hours of secret FBI recordings, sealed Gotti's fate. He was eventually convicted of murder and other crimes in 1992 and sentenced to life in prison. He passed away in 2002 at 61, dying of throat cancer in a federal prison hospital. The Teflon had finally peeled off. A 14-year-old boy gets expelled from school for punching a teacher. A few years later, he gets slashed across the face in a bar fight, earning a scar and a nickname he will never escape. By 26, he controls organized crime in one of the largest cities in the world. By 33, he is in prison. By 47, he is dead. Al Capone was an American Prohibition-era gangster who dominated organized crime in Chicago from 1925 to 1931 and became perhaps the most famous gangster in the United States. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Al Capone, was born in Brooklyn, New York, on January 17, 1899. His parents were immigrants from Italy. His father worked as a barber and his mother as a seamstress. Al grew up in Brooklyn with his 8 brothers and sisters. Despite having been a promising student, he was expelled at the age of 14 for hitting a female teacher, and he never went back. After leaving school, he gravitated toward the street gangs that operated across Brooklyn. Capone initially became involved with small-time gangs that included the Junior 40 Thieves and the Bowery Boys. He then joined the Brooklyn Rippers, and then the powerful 5 Points Gang based in Lower Manhattan. It was through the 5 Points Gang that Capone met the man who would shape his destiny. Johnny Torrio was the street gang leader, and among the other members was Lucky Luciano, who would later attain his own notoriety. Torrio became Capone's mentor, teaching him the business side of crime, how to run an operation with discipline, how to manage people, how to turn violence into profit, whereas Capone learned the business end of racketeering from Torrio, Yale, whose influence in the underworld came from his brutality. Taught the young gangster the power of violence. As a bouncer at the Harvard Inn, Capone received what would become his most distinguishing physical trait: 2 deep scars on his left cheek from a stabbing that he received in a fight. The press began referring to Capone as Scarface, a nickname he hated. It was never used in his presence. About 1920, at Torrio's invitation, Capone joined Torrio in Chicago, where he had become an influential lieutenant in the Colosimo mob. The rackets spawned by enactment of the Prohibition Amendment, illegal brewing, distilling and distribution of beer and liquor were viewed as growth industries. Torrio soon succeeded to full leadership of the gang, with the violent demise of Big Jim Colosimo, and Capone gained experience and expertise as his strong right arm. In 1925, Capone became boss when Torrio, seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, surrendered control and retired to Brooklyn. What followed was an astonishing reign of criminal power. According to various estimates, gangster Al Capone was worth about $100 million by 1927. That is approximately $1.8 billion in today's money. He ran gambling halls, brothels, and bootlegging operations that covered Chicago like a blanket. Despite his growing reputation as a crime boss, he managed to stay out of jail by bribing the police and politicians. He used his vast wealth to gain popularity with the people. During the Great Depression, it was Al Capone that opened the first soup kitchen for the homeless in Chicago. Then came the event that would permanently stain even Capone's cultivated reputation: the St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, might be regarded as the culminating violence of the Chicago gang era, as 7 members or associates of the Bugs Moran mob were machine-gunned against a garage wall by rivals posing as police. The massacre was generally ascribed to the Capone mob, although Al himself was in Florida. The massacre shocked the nation and brought federal attention that would prove devastating. A prohibition agent named Elliot Ness decided to go after Capone's operations. He gathered a number of loyal and honest agents that later earned the nickname the Untouchables because they couldn't be bribed by Capone. Ness and his men managed to raid a number of Capone's illegal facilities. In 1931, Capone was indicted for federal income tax evasion and was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He was confined in the Atlanta Penitentiary and Alcatraz before being released in 1939. Suffering from paresis derived from syphilis, he had deteriorated greatly during his confinement. Immediately on release, he entered a Baltimore hospital for brain treatment and then went on to his Florida home, an estate on Palm Island in Biscayne Bay near Miami. Following his release, he never publicly returned to Chicago. He had become mentally incapable of returning to gangland politics. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist, after examination, both concluded Capone then had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife and immediate family in a secluded atmosphere until his death due to a stroke and pneumonia on January 25, 1947. The man they called Scarface died at 48 years old, mentally destroyed by a disease he had contracted decades before his criminal empire had even begun. His name remains synonymous with the American gangster, a man from the slums of Medellin, Colombia, builds a cocaine empire worth $30 billion, gets elected to the Colombian Congress, declares war on the Colombian government, builds his own prison, escapes from it, and is shot dead on a rooftop the day after his 44th birthday. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was a Colombian drug lord, narco-terrorist, and politician, who was the founder and leader of the Medellin cartel. Dubbed the King of Cocaine, Escobar was one of the wealthiest conventional criminals in history, having amassed an estimated net worth of US $30 billion by his death, while his drug cartel monopolized the cocaine trade into the US in the 1980s and early 1990s. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on the 1st of December 1949 in Rio Negro, Antioquia Department. He was the third of 7 children and grew up in poverty in the neighboring city of Medellin. His father was a small farmer and his mother was a teacher. Escobar, the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher, began his life of crime while still a teenager. According to some reports, his first illegal scheme was selling fake diplomas. He then branched out into falsifying report cards before smuggling stereo equipment and stealing tombstones in order to resell them. Escobar also stole cars, and it was this offense that resulted in his first arrest in 1974. Shortly thereafter, he became an established drug smuggler, and by the mid-1970s, he had helped found the crime organization that evolved into the Medellin cartel. The Medellin cartel was not just a drug trafficking organization. It was a multinational enterprise with the sophistication of a Fortune 500 corporation and the violence of a paramilitary force. This money was the payoff of smuggling cocaine to the United States, said to total roughly 80 tons monthly, using jet airplanes filled with as much as 10 tons of cocaine per flight. Escobar apparently had 2 remote-controlled submarines that he also used for cocaine transportation. Escobar and the Medellin cartel had power over 80% of the world cocaine market. At the height of its power, the Medellin cartel dominated the cocaine trade, earning an estimated $420 million a week and making its leader one of the wealthiest people in the world. With a reported worth of $25 billion, Escobar had ample money to spend, and he did. Much of it was stored in warehouses and fields. According to his brother, about 10% or $2.1 billion was written off annually, eaten by rats or destroyed by the elements. Escobar's approach to power was summed up by a phrase that became his calling card, plata o plomo, Spanish for silver or lead, in which they could accept bribes or be assassinated. He applied this principle to every level of Colombian society: politicians, judges, police officers, journalists. Those who accepted the money became his allies. Those who refused were killed. At the height of his power, Escobar was said to be the 7th richest man in the world. He owned 20 houses in and around the Medellin area, as well as scores of vehicles, boats, planes, and helicopters. Escobar was a multi-billionaire and used some of his money to help the poor. He built soccer stadiums, schools, hospitals, and even a whole neighborhood in Medellin, Barrio Pablo Escobar, which consisted of 2,500 houses. This Robin Hood image earned him genuine loyalty from the poor communities of Medellin, who saw him as their benefactor even as he waged a campaign of terror that tore the country apart. He bombed an Avianca commercial airliner in 1989, killing over 100 people. He targeted police officers with bounties, offering payment for every officer killed. He bombed the headquarters of the DAS, Colombia's secret police. He kidnapped prominent journalists and politicians. He assassinated presidential candidates. The violence reached such an intensity that it destabilized the Colombian state itself. After 7 years on the run, Escobar surrendered to Colombian authorities in June 1991, following the negotiation of a plea bargain agreement. The terms were extraordinary. He would serve time in a custom-built prison called La Catedral, which Escobar himself had designed. It featured a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and a waterfall. It was a prison in name only. Escobar escaped in 1992. The Colombian government, reportedly aided by U.S. officials and rival drug traffickers, launched a manhunt. The Colombian and U.S. governments began to cooperate, and the U.S. Delta Force trained a specialized team put together by the Colombian government. The Search Block, as it was known, had the task of finding and capturing Escobar. A clandestine Central Intelligence Agency surveillance team, known as Centra Spike, which used airborne equipment, also aided the Search Block in locating Escobar. However, another group known as Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, were more threatening to Escobar because they were not tied to any government organization. Los Pepes, through their hunt for Escobar, were responsible for the deaths of more than 300 of Escobar's partners, friends, and relatives, and the destruction of many of Escobar's properties. On December 1, 1993, Escobar celebrated his 44th birthday, allegedly enjoying cake, wine, and marijuana. The next day, his hideout in Medellin was discovered. He was killed in a shootout with Colombian authorities. After 16 months of being on the run, Escobar's outlaw days came to an end on December 2, 1993. The Search Block, with help from Centra Spike, located him in a barrio in Medellin, and the ensuing gunfight that broke out on the Medellin rooftops as Escobar tried to escape, claimed his life. Escobar's legacy remains controversial. While many denounce the heinous nature of his crimes, he was seen as a Robin Hood-like figure for many in Colombia, as he provided amenities to the poor. His killing was mourned, and his funeral attended by over 25,000 people. From stealing tombstones as a teenager to controlling 80% of the world's cocaine supply, Pablo Escobar lived a life so extreme that it barely seems real. But the thousands of people who died as a result of his empire, they were very real. And that is why Pablo Escobar sits at the top of any list of the world's most famous gangsters.